Hello everyone and welcome to another Spotlight Sessions episode. I'm Dan Fisher, the host, and I'm really delighted to be here with Fred Hobbs, the Director of Public Relations at Imagine. So Fred, you and I have kind of gotten to know each other a little bit, but tell people about yourself, tell them about kind of your career up to now, and what led you to working at Imagine.
Sure. Well, I have been now at Imagine for 16 years as Director of Public Relations, and really, I will say early on in my career, after a while spent in food service, I wanted to find a job where I felt like at the end of the day, I was making a difference, that it wasn't just that some anonymous shareholder somewhere, their value would go slightly up. I wanted to feel like my work mattered, and it's been so motivating and helps me through days. Like any of us, none of our days are perfect, and sometimes we have challenges, sometimes we have conflict, but knowing when I'm done with work and knowing that the people I work with, we all want the same thing, for me, it makes all the difference. So I feel very fortunate to be at Imagine and doing what I do.
Well, I love that answer, and I can also attest to that. Like when I was looking for a job, the first thing that came up to me was like, what impact am I going to be making? And yeah, when you're making an impact, you're definitely, everything else smooths out. You might be having a bad day, you might be having a conflict, but at the end, if you're working to a grand goal, that's really what matters. And what is the grand goal of Imagine?
Well, our mission is to create a world of opportunity for all abilities. So I'll start with that. And we serve individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. That's things like autism, Down syndrome. And Imagine was established about 60 years ago by a group of parents living in Boulder, Colorado, who wanted their kids to have the same opportunities as all the other kids in the neighborhood. They wanted them to be able to go to school with the other kids. They wanted them to participate in Little League. And that sounds pretty obvious to us, but 60 years ago, which is, it's almost been 60 years now, that was a pretty radical idea, because people with intellectual and developmental disabilities at that time, for the most part, were literally hidden from their communities, locked away in institutions, because society basically said, we don't know how to, or we don't want to interact with these individuals. So they were essentially locked up, not because they committed a crime, not because they were dangerous to themselves or to other people, but just because society said no. And these parents said no back. They said, our kids should have the same inalienable rights as everybody else. They should be part of their community. And we continue to use that as the foundation of the work we do to this very day. We believe in the potential of all. We believe that individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities can and do contribute to their communities in ways big and small every single day. And it's our role to help facilitate that. And I use the word facilitate very intentionally, because we're at our best at Imagine if we're able to work with our community to find ways that the people we serve can be involved in the community. If we're just doing it ourselves, we're not making it happen. So full circle back to our mission, that's what we mean. We want to create this world where people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are fully part of an inclusive community.
Wow, I love that mission, and as you were describing that kind of 60 years back, and if you fast forward to today, to me that sounds completely something that's unjust, but 60 years ago was a very different environment. And if we're looking at kind of Imagine as a macro, as a way to kind of facilitate the integration really of people with developmental disabilities, what does your micro look like? Because you're working on the public relations side, what does your role look like? How do you interact with other employees and departments? What's your mission on the micro?
Well, my mission, I would say in terms of what my role is to share those stories about the people we serve and how they are in our community. We've come a long, long way, obviously, in 60 years, but we're not there yet. There's still people who don't understand our population, certainly people who don't recognize the value that the people we serve bring to their community. So I, in some ways, argue that I have the best job at Imagine, because what I'm able to do is take the success stories, take the stories about people we serve who have jobs out in the community, who are contributing, people who are artists, who are making beautiful works that the community wants to buy, wants to actually put up on display. So the biggest portion of my job and the most fun and most rewarding portion of my job is sharing those stories. So in the reason being is if we want to get to that world of opportunity for all abilities, first of all, the community has to know what the people we serve can and do bring to their community. So I have the honor and privilege of being the one who gets to share those stories.
Amazing. And as you were saying that, I was thinking it's currently, as we are having this conversation, it's National Disability Employment Awareness Month. So what are some of the benefits to hiring people with disabilities? Because it's very clear to myself and yourself, but to the listeners out there, what are the real benefits that come, kind of really the additional benefits?
Well, I will say with our population, first of all, you generally get incredibly dedicated workers, because these are folks who, even though we've come a long way, have experienced a lifetime of people doubting them, of not believing in them. And so when you are a company and you hire somebody with an intellectual and developmental disability, you're telling them they matter, and they understand that at a visceral level, and they're going to, in return, deliver for you. They are going to, for the job you hire them, I promise you, the people that we serve and help to find jobs are going to be some of your best employees. But there's more, there's also just the benefit for an organization to be a company to show that, look, I'm part of my community, I support my community, and one way that I do that is hiring people who have historically been marginalized by our community. So there's benefits there. And I will say right now, considering how difficult all companies are having to find good quality workers, the shortage that's out there, this is an untapped population that really deserves to be looked at more in terms of solving some of the labor force issues that companies all across the country are facing.
Absolutely, and an incredible answer. In terms of your work at Imagine, what is an achievement you're most proud of? It could be an Imagine achievement or an achievement that you've had personally in kind of your tenure there.
Well, I'll do an answer that I think covers both. For a long time, Imagine has promoted the idea that we can use technology to allow the people that we serve to be more independent. So just as an example, we're talking about employment. You know, some of the people we serve, we're talking about cognitive challenges. Maybe they're not always able to fully understand a task in steps, like taking step by step. We have been able to set some of the people up that we serve with little handheld devices that actually walk them through a work task step by step. They do the first one, they press a button and says, now go do this. You know, first, like if it's filing papers, get the papers from the desk. They press a button, put the papers in a file folder. This is just an example. Or same way, but maybe these are individuals who before couldn't cook a meal for themselves because the cognitive process of getting from the beginning of preparing the ingredients to the end really was too much of a challenge for them. But having a device that's walking them through the steps, something a phrase I kind of like to throw around, a cognitive prothesis, you know, just like an artificial leg might help a person walk. These are cognitive supports that help people get through that. And we have believed in technology so much that about a decade ago, we actually we have residential homes for individuals that we serve who aren't able to live on their own. We developed 2 homes, calling them smart homes, which were infused with technology, both very complex and very simple, to allow the people who lived in those homes to be more independent and to be more in charge of their own lives. But if it was just those 2 homes, then quite frankly, that would just be kind of an expensive way to serve maybe 14 people. So for Imagine, I'm very proud of the fact that we embraced it. For me, my goal in the last 10 years was in a lot of ways being a technology evangelist for the world of people who serve individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So went across the country at a bunch of different conferences. We created videos. We had social media about all of this stuff. And I really think opened the eyes to a field that had for a long time been a little bit hesitant and resistant to technology, realized that technology didn't have to be something that was scary, but rather could open doors that previously weren't able to open. And I mean that almost in a literal sense, that if you get somebody, say, who uses a wheelchair for mobility, having a device on their attached to their wheelchair that can speak to a door and open the door when they're ready to go in and out, versus having to have somebody else do it. That seems simple, but for someone who spent their entire lives relying on someone else to do something as simple as opening a door, it's a pretty profound thing.
Great answer, and that's something that I take for granted because I work in the field of kind of bridging the gap between technology and accessibility. And what are some of the technologies that you've encountered that people might not know about that might be really helpful to the community?
Well, I'll mention a couple of very quick ones from our smart homes. The smart homes, the individuals who live in there, this is something we tested a while. They're not using it right now, I don't think. But they'd have basically devices that they just wear on a lanyard on their neck. And the devices could talk to the different appliances in the home. So basically, if somebody wasn't able to, say, use a stove safely, but cognitively, we knew maybe if they were close to a stove, they might start messing with the knobs and turning something on, turning something into a very dangerous situation. This device would tell the stove that when this person is around, stove, you can't turn on, you can't operate. So it's a safety thing, which again opens door for more freedom, because otherwise, you know, in more traditional ways of providing services, that would mean you'd have to have a person working directly with them 24/7 if they're not able to do something like that safely. So that to me is one of the more complex ones. But also in those homes, they had countertops that would rise up and down just with a push of a button. Why does that matter? If you're in a wheelchair, well, traditional heights of counters and kitchens aren't really designed for you. You know, you have to reach your arms up like this to get there. But if they're lowered down, suddenly your participation in preparing a meal becomes a lot easier, and you become more part of that aspect of the simple aspect of community of cooking a meal with your friends or your family. So there's just two examples.
Amazing. And you have such a broad, I guess just having worked years in this industry, I was really curious as what your definition of accessibility and what accessibility mean to you as an individual as well.
That's a great question, because I think it's easy to focus on the tangible things that you see when it comes to accessibility, whether it's curb cuts or whether it's, you know, ramps up to buildings or signs that include Braille, all of which are great, vital, important. But I think true accessibility comes when we get to that point that the community recognizes that the people with a variety of disabilities, in our case it's intellectual disabilities, but all sorts of disabilities, can be part of their community, can contribute to their community, but the community has to be able to meet them at a certain point. And I don't mean necessarily all the way, but finding those spots where we can make accommodations kind of on both sides. And again, that has something that I think has been more readily available for people with physical disabilities, not so much for people with not just intellectual disabilities, but the variety of invisible disabilities that a lot of people have that we may not even know. Some chronic condition that doesn't allow them to interact with their community. So for me, I always say this, and I'm half joking, but I'm half serious. True accessibility, when we get to that point, my job won't need to exist. Imagine won't need to exist, because the communities, our society, will recognize that every person in this community has value and can bring value, and it's up to all of us to find where we can make those compromises and where we can meet in the middle so that everybody is able to show that value and bring that value. So if we get to true accessibility, then hopefully neither as much as I love my job, and I assume you love what you're doing right now, hopefully we won't have to do it at some point. It's a bit of a pipe dream, but I think we can get there.
Wow, that was super powerful, and I also think to myself that in the future, yeah, true accessibility will mean that there won't be organizations like ours and organization like yours, and that's something that's pipe dream. But also, I think with the narratives changing, something that we can believe to be possible. So, Fred, I really want to thank you for taking the time and giving your perspective and the perspective of Imagine. We really appreciate it, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Great.
Cheers.
Thanks so much. I appreciate the opportunity to share our mission, but more importantly, just talk about a population that has been somewhat ignored in the past, but we know bring tons of value to their communities and their neighborhoods.
Thank you, Fred.
You bet.